I thank Ellie for sharing so deeply about fall. I may share a little bit less deeply and more shallowly, actually, especially at the beginning. So I love fall partly because Starbucks rolls out their pumpkin lattes. I don't like to support the big coffee shops, but that's one season I love it, right? And then later in the fall, they roll out their eggnog latte, which throws us all off any possible diets we may have because they're almost 600 calories each. So as you knew, I grew up in Mississippi. Most of you would know that. I moved to Chicago with my aunt and uncle when I was 11, and from there on, I've always kind of lived in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, Lincoln, Nebraska, St. Louis, Madison, Stevens Point, those are Wisconsin if you're not familiar with that, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, where they have incredibly distinctive seasons, right? It's clear when it's fall, winter, spring, and summer. But then I lived in Siberia for 2 years, where there were 2 seasons, as there is here in Phoenix, but it's just the opposite, it's fall and winter. Here in Phoenix, it seems we have spring and summer. But I believe fall in certain respects, and yet I struggle between fall and summer. I think fall has always been one of my favorite seasons. There's something nostalgic about the scents and sounds of fall. The foliage changing colors here in Phoenix. We need to drive a little north on Central, where they've planted all of those non-native trees that lose their leaves. The foods, the holidays, the traditions, the apple picking, the raking of leaves, and jumping into leaf piles. Cooler weather to the hot summer, and I just loved jumping into leaf piles as a child. But here in Phoenix, you barely notice those seasons. And I remember moving here, and I felt sorely out of whack because my life kind of moved with those seasons, right? Our living, and like we talk about during the season of fall or winter, we hibernate a bit. Here in Phoenix, we hibernate a bit in the summer. And I lost, for me, that seasonal movement, at least for a couple of years, and then I realized the seasons are just more subtle here, and you need to recognize them, right? And live a little deeper into the seasons. And then I moved into my home. I do not live in the storage units. I actually have a home in front of that, just so you know. I'm in my tree in the backyard. This is a picture of the tree. It is losing its leaves currently. I think it believes it's fall primarily because we've had what? So little monsoon rain. And at least that tree reminds me as it loses its leaves that we are moving into fall. I think back to my very first sermon here, I believe it was, almost 6 years ago, January 19th, and I talked about coming from the frozen north of Minneapolis, where people experience seasonal affective disorder. SAD. Some of you may have moved here because you had a really difficult time with SAD in northern climates. Dark, cold fall, winter months, where plant life dies, everything is covered with snow or brown. People have lamps for artificial sunshine, right? Cabin fever sets in for some, and depression and anxiety. But here, I believe while I was visiting actually and candidating for this position, people kept telling me the sun is constantly out and we can't wait for cloudy monsoons. So I decided we suffer from SOD here, which is sun overload disorder. Any of you who are therapists, Jody, that's going to be in the DSM with a little footnote attributed to Reverend James Pennington, yes. So now we have to get a bit more serious. When Susan and I were talking about a series for September, we thought seasons. It's a new season. We're moving into a season. And we decided we would base this on Ecclesiastes. And I, in this first message, am going to unpack the book of Ecclesiastes that I'm going to call E. And I think he talks directly to us as Phoenicians because he says there is nothing new under the sun. We call ourselves the city of the sun. One phrase that E keeps repeating throughout the book of Ecclesiastes is there is nothing new under the sun, which has made its way into our normal conversation, right? And then he says, and I think this is really profound, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Next week, we will sing the song attached to that particular passage. So I don't know how many of you know much about the book of Ecclesiastes, or E. The Jewish community believes, or used to believe, that King Solomon wrote it. But, of course, modern scholars have to reject everything that was from previous scholars, because where would scholars be unless they had new ideas? So the modern scholars believe this was just the musings of a king, what king they are not sure, or queen, as he or she reflects on life's experiences and draws lessons from life experience, often self-critical. He hints at our lives being viewed from the idea of seasons, of summer, of fall, of winter, and spring. And all of us are probably experiencing the seasons of life right now. I don't know what season you believe yourself to be in. I don't think the seasons are necessarily associated with age. And in fact, I think the seasons rotate and rotate and rotate, and they don't come to us in any particular order. For example, I feel that my whole life has been living between fall and spring, with very little summer and very little winter. That's from my own personal experience. There's ideas and thoughts and relationships and positions that seem to always be dying in my life, and suddenly something new appears. My life feels like this constant process of letting go and putting on. And to be honest, it's quite exhausting not to have much winter and not to have much of a summer. E states that throughout these seasons of life, he or she has done just about everything and has experienced just about everything. So I would put E in the 40s or the 50s. But the bottom line is this, and this is kind of where the sadness comes in, where I had to kind of make sure that we had some laughter at the beginning. He says, or she says, nothing is ultimately reliable. That everything changes. And the king or the queen concludes, everything is dust in the wind. Everything is dust in the wind. And I know that chorus is going through everybody's mind. Kansas. Dusty and windy. Dusty and windy. The king and the queen says rulers and presidents will come and go, thank God. People will rise to power, but eventually they fall from power. Because in time, the writer says, death levels everything. Ouch. Kind of like you don't get out alive. Friday morning, we had a stark illustration of this. This is the back of our church, and we didn't want to show you the picture, but a man experiencing homeless who was Native American indigenous in his mid-40s died here on our property by our double red doors in the parking lot. Nobody really knew his name. We recognized him, but we didn't know his name, and we even called on some of our friends that work or are really deeper than we are even in the homeless community, but nobody knew his name. We assume he died alone, and we'll have a memorial for him when the detective gives me his name. But I think E goes on to say, this is what life is about sometimes. That death comes unexpectedly, and death ends up at your door unexpectedly. And he says, the really only good thing about life is to be present, to enjoy the moment, the now, because you just never know. In other words, time is short, time is fast, there's no replay and there's no rewind, so enjoy every moment as it comes. E says, but timing is everything, as Pastor Susan and Fernie read for us. In fact, he says, time isn't the main thing, it's the only thing, in cahoots with Miles Davis. So I recently read a book about timing, kind of in preparation for this, because Susan and I knew where we were headed before I left for the sabbatical, didn't we? We did. And Sherilyn Kenyon states this in a book about timing. She says, "In every universe, we play out different decisions we've made for whatever reasons. What breaks one person at one time can make them stronger at another. And one small variable can have devastating consequences." And she concludes, timing is everything. And haven't we experienced that in the seasons of life? Timing is everything. If I can disclose a little bit about Gil and Fernie, you met at a bar, if I'm correct? No? Where? Online. Oops. Uh-oh. I made that story up. They met online, perchance. Timing was everything. Timing is everything. And he expounds on that very famous litany the pastor Susan and Fernie read, the right time for birth, the right time for a death, the right time to plant, the right time to reap, the right time to kill, the right time to heal. And he goes on and she goes on and says, there's a right time to hold on and there's a right time to just let go. There's a right time to rip it out and there's another time to mend. There's a right time, I love this one, to shut up and another time to speak up. And there's a right time to love and a right time to hate. And there's a right time to wage war, and there's a right time to make peace. Golly gee, these times are really confusing for me. I've struggled with timing throughout my life. I always second and third and fourth guess myself. I am not impulsive with my actions, but I'm really impulsive with my emotions. Anybody in that camp? I used to believe, though, that God had a perfect way for my life. My Auntie Annabelle pounded into my head every time we left her home or we left somebody's home. She'd say, God willing, honey, we'll see you again, God willing. And at one point in my life, I thought there were only two ways. There was God's way and there was my way. God's way was perfect and wonderful and amazing, and my way stunk. In fact, if I went my way, my paradigm was, and my previous kind of more fundamentalist way of looking at things, is I could expect God to kind of kick me down the street. I would look for signs in the sky, on walls, under rocks, in the latest book from preachers and teachers, and it was exhausting. I used to be obsessed to find God's perfect will for my life. There was that one soulmate. There was the one soulmate, right? That eventually I figured out would be a man and not a woman. There would be a perfect husband, perfect wife. I would live blissfully with them for the rest of my days. I would try to determine, well, what kind of car does God really want me to buy? What kind of shirt did God want me to buy? What does God want me to eat tonight? At some point, though, I found liberation and I relaxed. And I finally realized that God has given us so many beautiful, amazing options. And God gives us the joy of choosing what we think may be best for our lives and for the lives of those around us. God gives us this life, and life is an oyster. And even if I make unhealthy choices for myself or for those around me, I get lots of divine do-overs. In fact, in the billions and trillions, like our military expending. And in this liberated mindset, there has always been one constant that remains. Whether you accept or reject it, God's love for you is permanent. Much of the details of life, and there are so many choices right now, and we are so divided and so perplexed and so confused about what is truth and what is false. The choices we make, it is a mystery. And I think God loves a good mystery. So the writer concludes, several times actually throughout the book, All things are from the hand of God. The writer says, enjoy the moment, enjoy time, enjoy your choices, enjoy the mystery, enjoy the very many seasons of life, whatever season you find yourself to be in, because you and they are in God's hands. And he goes on and he said, the world is full of risks, though. And he gives advice on political and economic and spiritual risk in the seasons of life. And he finally concludes once more and says, mortals should take pleasure when they can, for a time may come when no one can. So I kind of find this book written by a king or a queen or someone, right, to be rather depressing, but also to be freeing at the very same time. The writer says this is like it is. This is like life. It encourages us to live into the mystery of life and into the mystery of God's movements and seasons. Life is short. Enjoy it while you can, and dance like nobody is watching. Oh, the writer always goes back to these assuring words and says, God is in control. God is in control. God is in the dance. God is in the choice. God is even in the times where we really mess up and screw up pretty bad. And God is a mystery, and we don't know what God is up to, because we know gun violence is up. We can't cure cancer, let alone the common cold. People seem to have so much more road rage than ever before, and we're killing our planet. The wrong Amazon is burning, I'm told by Ellie. And we're losing precious oxygen because the Amazon is burning, and we're sucking all of the goodness out of planet Earth. And the writer of this ebook, oh, that's interesting, ebook, admits the conflict and the confusion, admits the questions, and admits that there are not a lot of answers. It is positive and life-affirming, but it's also very pessimistic. It's coherent and incoherent. It's insightful and it's confused. It's orthodox and it's heterodox. It's a mix of contradictions in this book, just like life and just like you and just like me. It is the story of us. The story of us. Nothing new under the Phoenix sun. We've all been here before. But in this life, it is best, we are told, to simply enjoy God's gifts. And this is E's final conclusion. At least that's what I see as the final conclusion, or potentially the bottom line. God made everything beautiful in itself and in its time. Now, that includes not just the situations and circumstances and places in our life, but it includes you and it includes me. But God's left us in the dark. Do you ever feel that way? So we can never know what God is up to. And then she or he goes on to say, I've decided that there's nothing better to do than go ahead and have a good time and get the most out of life. That's it. Eat, drink, and make the most out of your job. It's God's gift. I can breathe a sigh of relief in that. You can't fight the seasons of life. Instead, embrace the season you are in and cherish the moment that will soon be gone. So, in my final summary, because I was supposed to talk more about fall, but I had to unpack this book because it's so incredibly powerful once I got into it, is that we are living in, I think, the fall of America. No pun intended. We are living in the fall of America. Society, individuals, everything seems to be in upheaval. Not just change, but in upheaval. Everything's changing, the leaves are falling, rights are dropping left and right. Truths and untruths are everywhere. Technology now seems to be moving at a warp speed. How do we keep up? We have been here before, the writer of the Ecclesiastes reminds us. But each moment in our lives, and the moment even in our nation, are unique, and they will never be repeated. We will never be here in this configuration at this time ever again in our lives. And then he says, nothing is for sure. Change is the only thing that is the absolute. They agree. But this is our moment to let fall in America speak to us. Speak to your heart and to your soul in ways that we may have never been spoken to before. Autumn and fall, whichever you choose, Ellie, shows us how beautiful it is to let things go. If those trees don't drop their leaves, they're not going to get some new green, fresh ones. During sabbatical, I had a chance to meet this rabbi, as well as many other people that I will probably share over the next year. And I read his book that's entitled Saying No and Letting Go. I think I'm starting to become Jewish. Actually, I think I'm rediscovering Jesus' Jewish roots, right? I got some favorite rabbis out there. So, Jewish wisdom on making room for what matters most. Rabbi Edwin Goldberg. I would encourage you to pick up the book. And in my conversations with Rabbi Edwin Goldberg, this was the most profound statement he made. He said, all we can hope to accomplish by paying attention is to learn to live with the mystery, become more comfortable with not knowing, and try to enjoy life's uncertainty. Every day is a gift, but we often squander it by missing what matters most. I think the rabbi might have read this book a lot. The book taps into this incredibly timeless Jewish wisdom that somehow didn't make it into the Christian faith. Jesus was a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew. It should have. That teaches us to hold on tightly to the things that matter most. That's Jewish wisdom. Hold on tightly to the things that matter most, while also learning to let go lightly of those things that ultimately don't really matter. So I encourage you, siblings, on the journey. And somebody expressed to me over the course of the last week with the Soul series that their soul was kind of tarry and they were having a difficult time. I think it's because we hold on so tightly to the stuff that we just can't seem to let go of. All those things that Ecclesiastes lists. But I would encourage you to let go lightly. I encourage you, my siblings on the journey, to hold on tightly to the things that matter most. And you need to be the decider on that one. In all of the various seasons that you find yourself in life, let go lightly of the things that don't really matter. I'd leave you with some words from another philosopher, like Socrates, who says, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Let's read it out loud together and say that to each other and say that to ourselves. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. May it be so. Amen.